Just happy to be back at the New York show. I missed it last
Yeah.
year. And get to see some old friends and
Hmm.
talk fishing, a little different kind of fishing than what we do. And I always pick something up when I come
Yeah.
to this show.
So you get over here with all these Lake Ontario guys. You're a
Yeah,
Lake Michigan guy.
yeah.
You fish out of Ludington, right?
Fish out of Ludington.
Yep. And what's happening in Ludington over the last year?
Oh, over the last year,
Yeah.
we had really good fishing this year.
Hmm.
And one of the big things, we went like 7 years without a salmon plant.
Hmm.
And the DNR figured, I mean, king salmon. We had some coho, but not king salmon. The DNR figured we'd get enough natural reproduction out of the Pere Marquette River. And so they didn't plant any kings in our port. They planted them in the next port up in Manistee because they have a weir there.
Hmm.
So we would get some overflow. We'd get some kings hanging out, but it was nothing like what we used to have when they planted them.
Hmm.
So the DNR, the, their thought about we're getting enough salmon out of the Pere Marquette River, that didn't pan out
Yeah.
with the natural reproduction. So this year we are Ludington Charter Boat Association with the DNR. We net penned 100,000 kings.
Hmm.
So we're excited about that to get
Yeah.
some returns back. And we had excellent king fishing though this year in
Hmm.
Ludington. And one thing we can attribute it to is the amount of bait that we have there.
Okay.
And we have a lot of structure there. We have a drop off in Big Point Sabo, Little Point Sabo to the south, and so that bait just kind of hung out in there
Hmm.
all season, and the king stayed there too.
Yeah.
Our early May fishery for lake trout
Hmm.
isn't what it used to be. It was like a guarantee when you could go out in early May, real early May. We typically fish for brown trout up close to shore, like 14, 20 feet of water in,
Hmm.
and we would catch some lake trout in there too. The area where we're fishing those, it's kind of rocky, so there's a lot of gobies in there.
Hmm.
So that would bring the browns in and the lake trout. But and then as the water warmed a little bit, those fish would move out to 60, 70 feet of water. Well, it used to be a guarantee that we could go in there and catch our limit of lake trout.
Hmm.
The last 2 years, it hasn't been like that. And what we're figuring is with the increased alewife population and the increased bloater chub population offshore in the
Hmm.
offshore reef out there, that maybe those lake trout are staying out there and feasting on those chubs and on the gobies out there in that reef so they don't have to move into that shallow
Hmm.
water. But the kings moved in May and stayed there for quite a long time.
Hmm.
And so, and we just had great fishing all year.
Yeah.
It was just a super early year for both of us.
Yeah, it was super for you
I
too.
thought it'd be cool to have George on today because we're both 40 plus year guys,
Yeah.
the charter industry, and I've always watched what goes on in Lake Michigan because they were ahead of us.
Mhm.
So in some ways you see similar trends, and in other ways it's different.
Well, one trend I'm seeing that I've noticed here is Lake Ontario used to be like where the big ones were,
Hmm.
and they held the Great Lakes record for I don't know how many years, and that was just recently broken, I think 3 years ago in Ludington, with that 47-pound plus king salmon that was caught off Big Sabo Point right out of the port of Ludington,
It
Hmm.
was it was
and
decades that record wasn't broken.
yeah,
Decades.
decades, and it's broken now. We haven't seen another 40-pound fish there, but we do seem to have bigger fish now than Lake Ontario. And we're getting good numbers, but I'm not sure. But maybe the numbers are a little bit better on Lake Ontario. Would you say?
I would say the last 2 or 3 years, but I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of the fishery is it never turns into a cookie cutter fishery. There there was an anomaly that went on in Lake Superior a couple years ago. I mean, they generally produce the smallest mature salmon of any of the Great Lakes. Well, then they had a return, and the results were proven in the derbies they have up there. high 20-pound fish when they hadn't had any over 15 pounds on that derby in years. And what it is these various bait fish that are doing well. There was a huge class of Cisco's, and they exploded, and they were of size that those fish could eat. So some of those fish became enormous, and I'm sure that's how that fish was created. We just don't know enough. As fascinating as it is, we don't know if the tendency to grow enormous is higher in a wild hatch fish or in a stocked hatch fish. We have suspicions, and we're trying to learn more. In Ontario, we're doing studies of flesh and scales and things like that. We don't have the data back yet, but I've heard that in Michigan, a lot of clipping too. We're trying to learn which of those is producing those fish.
Yeah, I honestly I can't say, but I think it was a natural fish, that 47 pounder. I'm pretty sure it had an adipose fin on it. But the Dreamweaver booth, that's who I'm here with, Dreamweaver Lure Company. Their booth is right next to the Lotsa booth. And they have the winner of the Derby last year, 27 pounds, right? 27 pounder is a real good fish, but it doesn't turn many heads, the last couple of years in Lake Michigan. I mean, it's a beautiful fish, but personally, I caught the biggest fish to come on board my boat, and like Vince said, I've been fishing over 40 years out of Ludington. Was caught in 2022. It was 33.34 pounds, and that was the second biggest fish caught at Captain Chuck's. And that's our main bait shop there in Ludington, Captain Chuck's. Yeah, it was only the second biggest, and that was 33.34. So, I haven't caught a 30 pounder. I didn't catch one last year.
Yeah.
But 28s, 29s, yeah.
And I think the main thing what I saw last year when I was over on your side of the lake and just talking to people was that the weight of the average fish was up significantly. So, just your everyday, cookie cutter fish weighed more this year than what you'd seen in the past. And, I think if you went and talked to the fisheries managers, they would tell you that that was by design. And, when we talk about not putting as many fish in as maybe some people would like, they're going to say, well, this is why you're going to get bigger fish because there's just more for them to eat out there. Is that something that you believe in, or what do you think about that?
Yes. I'm on board with the Michigan DNR approach of being cautious about it. And we went through a steady, like 2012, we had those cookie cutter fish where we were catching it was scary. They were catching them all up and down the coast of Lake Michigan. Normally, in August and stuff, the southern ports aren't catching many kings at all. They're all up in our area. They were catching them all up and down the coast. Limit catches of 12 to 16 pound kings. I mean, and it was really scary. You're thinking, my gosh, is there going to be enough food out here for them? So that's when the DNR started scaling back with their cuts, and everybody was on board. But I can't really recall what year it was, but their initial plan was to scale it down to not planting any Chinooks in the Michigan side of Lake Michigan. And anglers, Lake Michigan Citizen Advisory Committee members, of which I belong to, and all the associations were against that no planting plan. So they, have reconsidered and started planning a little more. And with the, what do I want to say, the amount of bait that we have now, they feel like they could go ahead and plant some more fish and not worry like what happened on Lake Huron when the kings ate them out of house and home.
Yeah, it's really not proven that they can do that in Michigan and Ontario. But I guess I respect how ultra cautious they were. Huron was never a producer of alewives that Michigan and Ontario are. and very vulnerable to temp swings, and it got colder deeper because of where it lays. So I think there's a happy medium there. I think it's, for years they were telling us if it starts going like Michigan was, it never comes back. Well, that's already been proven to be false.
Correct. It has.
What happened was we had mild winters and early springs, and the alewives just did better and better. It was less cold water they had to deal with, big hatches, and you guys, your size went up, but so did your numbers. Because I know Wisconsin stocked a lot of fish.
Yeah, they stock more than
And you've been able to get your return back. The only problem with, and this is going to be an ongoing topic, they're never going to come out and say we love that they're naturalized now. Because there's such a strong faction of people that just want native species. The problem is it will never support the sport fishing that we have. If you know the sport fishing we have on all the Great Lakes now, if you turn them loose on just walleyes and lake trout, they get eradicated quick. Those moving fish, those pelagics, they're really hard to just damage rod and reel because they're open water fish. But what we're finding is if you just rely on natural recruitment, it's so disparities in where that happens. You know, like he said, we didn't have our fish, we didn't have our plants. They said the Paramount Cat would take care of it. Well, what if they had a weak hatch? That's a lot of angler effort there, and a lot of nice marinas, and a lot of boat access, all depending on the fishery. They really need to get their plants every year there. And sure, there'll be some years where Paramount Cat kicks out a killer hatch. That's happening in Ontario, but it's very relatively few places that do that. So if you're going to have a port to port fishery, you kind of got to balance the two.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you have a lot of fish in the lake, on average, this doesn't matter if it's walleyes, doesn't matter if it's brown trout, doesn't matter if it's salmon, it's going to change the average size. But what has been proven is it's not permanent. So there's going to be cyclical things. I think mild winters and good hatches of bait are just as big a factor as the density of the fish.
Yeah.
Oh, I would have to agree.
And I think they would say that to you too. I think people are well aware of the bait and what we've had in that lake the last couple of years has been really good. And I think that's what's led to the big fish that you're seeing out on the water. George, we got a question here. I think you can probably answer this. They still stock Skamania Steelhead in Lake Michigan. Why did the program not gain traction in Lake Ontario?
Well, the Skamania that were stocked in Lake Michigan were down in the southern end of the lake. And I'm in the mid part of Lake Michigan, the northern central, they call it the central Lake Michigan zone. And we didn't stock, as to my knowledge, no Skamanias were stocked up in our end of the lake. Now, we did have out of Ludington, there were 2 years where we did got a run of them. They came in the Pier Marquette around the 4th of July. When it was a surprise when somebody accidentally caught one. Then we went in there and started fishing for them.
Yeah.
That only lasted about 2 years. But to my knowledge, they never really had a big plant there. But they plant them down in the southern end of the lake.
Okay.
And I think Indiana, Benton Harbor, Michigan City. They have a Burns Ditch that's really noted to have a big Skamania population there, but I really can't answer that about.
Yeah.
I think they did it in Lake Michigan, in those states, because there was such a migration of the Pacific salmon north. And a lot of that was driven by the tribs they could reproduce in. So they just leave them high and dry. And they'd have lake trout to run too, different rock piles and stuff. But that created a silverfish fishery that was like no other. And I could speak to Lake Ontario. I would say it is mainly because they've been fighting so much just with the bread and butter strain of steelhead between cormorant bird predation, raising them to size with the cold water that they have to deal with in the hatchery. They have to hold them to a year, unlike Chinooks, which would be released at a fingerling They have to hold them to a year. So they take up a lot of hatchery space, and the Skamania were just that much more complicated and costly. But that being said, I do believe they still do put a Skamania strain in the Salmon River. But we could definitely check on that. But I think it was just they didn't do what they wanted them to do. When they did survive, they still behaved in Ontario more like a Washington strain steelhead, a regular Chambers Creek steelhead, where they would come in late after a lot of the boats were gone anyway, and but provide a good river fishery. So I would say their emphasis is still there because they get their best bang for the buck with those fish, but it's complicated. They've tried to work steelhead and salmon out of one hatchery, and in the case of Michigan, they have different priorities with the different states. So those Skamania steelhead that were stocked in Indiana were coming from their hatcheries.
George, what do you see happening this year with the winter that we have right now? What do you expect for 2025 out of Ludington?
Oh, I'm thinking I'm hoping that it's going to be pretty much a repeat of next year, of last year. And we're getting the last few years we've had more coho in Ludington than what we had prior to that, because we've been getting 40 to 50,000 planted directly in Ludington, out at Ludington State Park, which we never had before. We always get a coho migration coming through, working their way up to the Platte, Frankfurt area, Platte Bay, where they have the hatchery up there.
Yep.
So we would get them for maybe a week or two. A lot of times the fish would go up the Wisconsin coast, then cross Lake Michigan. And when they crossed around the Ludington area or south of that, they'd come through and hang out for a while, but then they'd be gone. And the last couple of years, we've had them stick around. So I'm thinking we're still going to have those coho come in, and we'll see. We'll see. I'm expecting a good fishery again.
Yeah, sounds good. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we let you go here today?
Tell us about what you're excited coming out of Dreamweaver.
Well, I just happen to have something in my back pocket.
All right, he was ready.
I didn't bring much.
He was prepared.
This has been out a few years, and
I agree.
I've always been a spin doctor guy, right? And a lot of people have run these small paddles before, and I would run some occasionally, but I just didn't run them a whole lot because I had so much faith and so much success using the spin doctors. But they came out with this flip fin right here, and this flip fin, so you can run it, fast, like this with just like a traditional paddle.
Yeah.
And then you pull the fin out, and it runs more like a spin doctor. Here, you get more of the rotation instead of going this way. So you can run it slower and still get a lot of good action out of it. So I started running some of these with the fin, and they've had really, really good success.
I agree. I like them.
And so, you kind of get 2 in 1 here.
Yeah.
So, I'm excited about that. And I think somewhere down the road, they're going to have the big 11-inch flasher with the same kind of a flip fin in it. So, and a lot of new spoon colors this year and flasher colors. And Dreamweaver also has purchased Warrior Lure Company and Bay Rat Lures.
Yeah.
And so that's something I've noticed at the Dreamweaver booth. Bay Rats were never really that big up in our area. But boy, the guys over here love those Bay Rats.
Oh, yeah.
And so Dreamweaver now is producing, they're going to produce them all, but right now the short shallow is what they're having now. And
again, just getting out here and being around the Lake Ontario people, for you guys, the Michigan guys, I think it's really good, because I think we're seeing more and more information being shared between the Great Lakes, where before it was kind of everything was pretty localized. But
yeah, I really like it. Come over here. Got a chance to fish with Vince a couple times.
Yeah.
Fished the Niagara Bar, loved it. Caught some nice fish out there, brown trout and some nice Lakers, and then fished up at the river, caught a bunch of steelhead. We had a great time.
Awesome.
And in the early days before I went full-time chartering, I used to go to Lake Michigan, take a trailerable boat, and have mutual respect. I've seen Platte Bay. I've been off Ludington. It's Frankfurt. Beautiful places.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Very good, George.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.